Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Year of the Book, where we're documenting the writing journey and all the bumps along the way. I am back in the kitchen today to tell you what I learned in my 7th month of writing. Now, I still owe you what I learned in my 6 months of writing, because for that video I wanted to do like a 6-month review, which requires quite a lot of editing, and I just kind of haven't had the energy to do all the edits. So it is on its way, but it is going to come after the 7 month, confusingly. So, you know, sorry about that, but who said everything has to run in a linear direction? So this is what I learned in July, and I've got 3 things to share with you whilst I'm starting to prepare a soup. So the first thing is I learned a little bit about how to move through rejection. Now, I don't think this is the same as dealing with rejection. I started to make my first submissions to magazines, anthology calls, and a couple of competitions around the end of May, and the first rejections started to come through in June. Now, I've only had a handful. I haven't had any acceptances yet. There's still lots of people I'm waiting to hear from. And, you know, receiving the actual rejection felt okay, like obviously disappointing, right? But ultimately I kind of felt okay about it. I sort of processed it and then I moved on. I do think that it had a slightly delayed reaction subconsciously, in that around the same time I started to feel a bit more like self-critique, a bit more kind of hating on my work and thinking that it wasn't very good. And those things are not a coincidence, obviously. But overall, I'm like, okay, rejection, fine. Now, what I wasn't prepared for is what to do after rejection and how to kind of keep going. So firstly, I haven't made that many submissions. And, you know, all the rejections I got with, I think it was 3 different magazines from 3 different stories so far. So I haven't sent the same story to lots of different publications yet. I haven't done that. And I've been kind of thinking really carefully about where do I want to send pieces to, probably overthinking it a little bit. And then once the rejections came in, I was a bit like, okay, like what now? Do I need to rework those stories? Because you don't know the reason for the rejection, because it's just a form rejection. I felt a bit lost as to kind of what to do next. And at the start, making those submissions felt like a really big deal, and it is a big deal. But now that I've done several and I started to get the rejections through, submitting and getting the rejections is already feeling like a bit less of a big deal, a bit more of a routine activity as I get used to both preparing the submission, sending it off, and then receiving rejections. So that's why I said, you know, I learned about moving through rejection. And I think because those things don't feel so big anymore, they're kind of easier to navigate. They feel a bit more like part of my kind of everyday or my weekly writing routine. I think I also realized through this process just how competitive it is out there to get short stories published. I looked at the acceptance rates for some of the magazines I've been sending work to, and they kind of vary between like usually less than 2% acceptance rate, basically. And even when I submit work to academic journals, even some of the journals that I've been looking at, which are considered, you know, quite prestigious, quite highly rated, their acceptance rates were about 8%. So that's a lot higher. And I think I didn't realize just how many submissions publications get as well. So all that, sorry, the onion is starting to make my eyes water. All that is starting to help me put those rejections in perspective and see that simply because there's, you know, a relatively small cap on the number of pieces they might publish at each month, each quarter, just how small the chance of getting accepted actually is. And it's not necessarily a reflection on the quality of work. So that's the first thing that I learned about, is moving through rejection. Now, the second thing is kind of related to that. I don't really know what to call this. I guess it's something about getting used to the kind of ebb and flow and the fluidity of the process of writing, editing, submitting, revising short stories. Oh my God. Excuse me. I gotta get this in the pan ASAP. So what do I mean by that? Well, I have quite a strong desire, internal desire, to work on things in a linear way. So I tend to want to start a story, write the story, finish the first draft, edit the story, prepare it for submission. Now, I haven't really been doing that during my writing journey so far, but that has still remained my strong preference. I didn't like to leave anything unfinished. And, you know, I've talked about before how I have this fear of not finishing things. Sorry, I must look ridiculous. I have this fear of not finishing things, right? So I want to do one thing, work on it, get it finished, box it off. And I've kind of realized that I don't have to do that. And, you know, not finishing something in one linear chunk is not going to mean the end of it. It's not going to mean that I kind of abandon it completely. And I'm starting to feel more comfortable moving between stories, leaving something unfinished for a little while, coming back to it when I feel like it, and kind of following my motivation a little bit more and going where my interest takes me, rather than thinking I have to write this story because this is what I started last week or whatever. So it's getting used to that. And, you know, I actually already do this with my academic work. So I'm always working on multiple projects, multiple pieces of writing at any one time. But I actually find this really stressful in a work context, because usually I'm not just writing a piece by myself. I'm working with other people. There are deadlines. You have a process of, you know, passing work between you as an authoring team. And logistically, it's a lot more challenging to be working on lots of different pieces of writing than it is when it's just you working on your short stories. You know, I'm on my own deadlines. Okay, there's like submission windows and stuff, but ultimately, it's just me. I'm relying on myself. Other people are not relying on me to do things. So it's quite a different situation. And I'm starting to get used to that more relaxed approach to it, that I can just move around. And it's kind of a natural ebb and flow of activity. Like that there will be weeks where I'm working really hard because I want to submit something before a submission window closes. And that there will be other weeks when I'm just kind of writing something in a leisurely way. I don't know where I might send it. So I'm just getting used to that kind of approach that's less rigid and less linear. Right, I got the onion in, thank God. The third thing I learned, this feels kind of embarrassing actually, but I mean, not embarrassing, like who cares? But anyway, I kind of learned for the first time that my writing probably leans more towards literary fiction or upmarket than commercial fiction. Now, when I started writing at the beginning of the year, I did not know what these things meant, basically. I'd never thought about it. I'd never been involved in a sort of more in-depth way in writing or thinking about literature or publishing or anything like that. Right? As a reader, I just read stuff. I didn't think, oh, this is a commercial novel, right? I just read it. And sometimes I thought, this is crap. And sometimes I thought, I like this. I would distinguish things by, you know, when they were written. So things from sort of early 20th century and before, I thought of those as like more classical literature. I don't even know if that's correct. Or, you know, more contemporary stuff. And I was aware that I would pick up books like crime, thrillers, things like that, from certain authors who you see over and over again. You see them in the book exchanges and charity shops. You see them in the bookstores. that would be kind of fast paced, driven by plot, that wouldn't necessarily be written in a beautiful way. And I would sometimes read those, right? And I would sometimes be okay with them. But my preference as a reader was always for writing that was a bit more lyrical, that was more focused on like deep character development and on, you know, the language, the prose. Like, this is what interested me. And I think as a result of those interests as a reader, that is how I have tended to want to write. You know, whether I actually do that well or not is a different matter. But that has been my preference for the style of writing. And I realized this month that, and again, like I say, it feels kind of embarrassing to say, but I realized this month that in comparison to the lot of the things that I read in some of the literary magazines I've been sending things to, a lot of the stuff that I write feels kind of boring. Now, it doesn't feel boring to me, and I know that it doesn't feel boring to a certain kind of reader and audience, but I just thought that maybe, like, for the audiences that are reading and writing in some of these magazines, it's just not exciting enough. It's not plot driven enough, because that hasn't been really what's interested me as a reader or writer. Now, I don't have any kind of solution to this. You know, I write how I write, and I like the style that I write in. But I kind of came to this awareness for the first time. And that's because I would start to read a story, a short story published in a literary magazine. And at the beginning, I was like, well, this isn't very well written. Like, I don't really like it. It's just not for me, right? But then as I went on, I would realize why it's published there, because the story is absolutely compelling, right? And that would keep me reading to the end of the short story. And I thought that, okay, well, my stories aren't really like that. Like, I think they are, you know, quite nicely written. I think they're beautifully written in some places, but sometimes my storyline is just not that compelling. I think that I have compelling characters who are complex and nuanced and flawed, but I'm not sure that the story is as good as the character development, basically. And I like that in a story. I like stories where not that much stuff happens. But I don't know whether many other people in today's reading market are like me. The other thing is that, you know, a lot of my inspiration for, especially some of my older stories, has been, you know, classic ghost story writers like M.R. James. And I love that classical style. But again, you know, it's not contemporary, and it probably just feels dated and boring. Like, there's not any big shocks, big surprises in the ghost story. It's like a classic sort of slow burn, you know, atmosphere of dread. There's not necessarily like twists. There's no, yeah, it's a different style, right? And maybe that style has just gone out of fashion. People don't want to read that anymore because they can read it elsewhere from these classic authors, right? Why would they want to read it from me if it doesn't offer anything different? So this is my embarrassing lesson that I learned, that, you know, maybe my writing is a little bit boring for a contemporary market. Or maybe it's just that I lean into the more sort of literary fiction style. So maybe we can say that, because that is less embarrassing. But ultimately, I need to consider that when I send my stories to different publications, I need to be thinking about this and thinking, like, is this really the right publication for this story, which is all about this deeply flawed character in a relatively everyday domestic situation? And is that the right outlet for that? Or is it something that I need to experiment with in my writing and try writing something that is more plot driven, that is more visceral in that sense? I don't know. I don't know what the solution to this is. It's just something that I'm starting to become aware of. and I'm thinking about it. And, you know, it could be seen as a really kind of negative thing. Like, okay, maybe my writing is just boring, right? But I'm not really seeing it like that, because I still have belief and confidence in my writing. So I see it more as an opportunity to play around with what I do in my writing and just think about it from that perspective instead. So that is what I learned in my seventh month of writing. As I said, I will come back to you with the 6 months, I promise. But overall, it's been a pretty good month, despite the rejections. I mean, that feels like it is part of the process, right? The fact that I submitted things and they got rejected is still progress to me, right? So I'm proud of that. I hope it's helpful to share my writing journey with you and all the things I'm learning along the way. If it was, do give me a thumbs up and subscribe. It really helps. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.